I wish I knew how it would feel to be free.
Oh, I wish I knew how to get through all the things happening in our country and our world right now. I have some ideas, and I want to share them with you this morning, but it's pretty intense. The song that Cynthia just sang was an anthem of the civil rights movement in the 1960s here in America. The most popular version was recorded by Nina Simone in 1967 on her Silk and Soul album. Now, this is Black History Month, and you know what? There's a lot that we could learn right now from the ways that African Americans have endured and survived and transformed American society. A lot of us, especially those of us who identify as white and progressive, are struggling with navigating a government that seems upside down and destructive and oppressive and not in our best interest. Well, African Americans know something about living in and surviving in and changing such conditions. And this month, as I mentioned earlier, our theme is spiritual practices. And so today, I'm going to share 4 main spiritual practices that we all need to have in our spiritual toolkits in order to stay healthy and to stay engaged. I've even put some space in your order of service if you're here in the sanctuary. There's in the little handout where you can write some notes, because these are things that we need to take home with us. It's tempting in times like these to just check out, to disengage, because it can seem so overwhelming and so dispiriting. And then there are those of us who want to get right out on the battlefield and be in the struggle for change as activists. But to be spiritual and without being engaged in the world's problems is just another form of escape. What's the point of being at peace internally while the world is on fire and people are starving and dying? If we weren't doing anything to create change and just caring for ourselves, that's a pretty anemic spirituality. To paraphrase Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we don't want to become adjusted to a maladjusted world. And at the same time, if you're trying to be an activist to create change without spirituality or spiritual tools, that's a recipe for burnout. Fighting for change is hard work. There are successes and there are setbacks and frustrations. We can be working for years, giving our all, and people are still starving and abused and dying. This will kill your spirit without having a spiritual grounding for the work that you're doing in the world. So I hope that we agree that we need both spirituality and activism and engagement together in order to live a balanced life and to show up in this moment. So today, I'm going to make sure that you leave here with total clarity about the 4 kinds of spiritual tools that you need to have right now and be using. I learned these about 15 years ago from teacher and author Andrew Harvey, who actually came and spoke in this pulpit back then. The first kind of practices are called cooling practices. These are practices that help us cool down when we're too angry or anxious or overwhelmed. Has anyone else been feeling any of those emotions? Yeah, okay, yeah. We all need techniques for calming down and grounding. Peaceful practices like meditation, breathing exercises, things like chanting or visualization and centering prayer. If you have a pen, you can write down what are some of your cooling practices that you use or that you want to learn and use to get through these times when you're inflamed with anger or anxiety. One of the greatest African American theologians and educators, Christian mystics of the 20th century, was Howard Thurman. He taught and inspired Martin Luther King Jr., among others. He wrote a lot about the importance of what he called centering prayer or centering down. Thurman's theology of radical nonviolence influenced and shaped a generation of civil rights activists. These were people facing unbelievable violence and backward, oppressive political ideology. We can learn a lot from Howard Thurman. He wrote, "How good is it to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by? The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashing, with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull." He explained, we need to take time every day, to listen to what he called the stillness that the heart makes clear. We need to find a way to float up through all of the jangling echoes of our turbulence, to tap into a sound of another kind, a deeper note which only becomes apparent in silence. In this stillness, he explains, we can hear the whisper of the heart, giving strength to weakness, courage to fear, and hope to despair. Thurman advises us to take time every day, to take time to give your soul a rest and to let it mend. He called it centering down, and he said it's a time to check the rhythm of your purposes. Centering down, he said, is about making time for renewal and refreshment, and with it comes a heightened perspective, which we need. Are you taking time to center down at least once every day? Do you have and are you using some cooling practices when you're getting too anxious, too overwhelmed, too angry in these times? Write some down. Begin to use them if you're not. We need this right now. And the second kind of spiritual practices are heating practices. These are for when we become too cool, too apathetic, too dispirited, and when we need to be re-inspired and re-motivated. People say to me all the time, "No, I'm exhausted. This is just too much." It's hard to be a source of positive change when we feel this way. Spiritual practices that are heating keep our hearts alive in disheartening times. Heating practices help stir our passion and our compassion when they're being dampened down. They can include such things as drumming and dancing, music, kundalini yoga, poetry, singing. Heating practices get our hearts pumping and our bodies moving. Music and dancing and movement have been powerful tools for resistance throughout history. They help people cope with oppression and alienation and trauma. Again, we can turn to African American history. Think of how black people in North America have demonstrated resilience to wave after wave of harsh and inhumane treatment. During slavery and the Middle Passage, through the brutality of the segregation of the Jim Crow era, and through enduring unequal treatment that continues even to this day. As more and more people across ethnicities and identities are experiencing inequality and inhumane and dehumanizing policies, we have a lot to learn from African American history and people. There have been songs in many genres in every generation that have helped African Americans endure severe conditions and scary times. Today, there are policies and executive orders trying to strip transgender Americans of their names and their identities. Remember, Africans who were brought to America were stripped of their names and of their identities. We need to learn from these brilliant ways of maintaining sanity and dignity. This perseverance from unending struggle and epic triumphs that have followed. No small part of the equation was music, drums, songs, spirituals, chants, dancing. Despite losing so much, Africans in America and the generations of African Americans have had an indelible spirit of creative resistance against all odds, using dance and music to express anger, grief, and to experience joy in the midst of enormous hardships. These are what we call heating practices. We all need them because sometimes we just get too cooled down, too numbed out, too disconnected. They offer moments of relief and rejuvenation through the atrocities from slavery to Jim Crow, and to this day, we need to draw on these examples right now in these times. And since I've made the connection to the transgender struggles of today, I want to remind us also of the resilience of the gay community through the AIDS crisis in the 80s and the 90s. We can learn a lot from the ways that the gay community used joy as a source of resilience. In the midst of a plague that was decimating the community day by day, there's a theology of joy that comes from the queer community that includes celebration, dancing, sexuality, and creativity that is a resource in these kinds of times that we're living in. Our biological and spiritual ancestors have been through many periods that help put our situation now in a much broader perspective. In the words of rapper Kendrick Lamar, who will be at the Super Bowl, singing at the Super Bowl this afternoon, he said, 400 years ago, as slaves, we prayed and sung joyful songs to keep our heads level-headed with what was going on. 400 years later, he writes, we still need that music to heal. What tools and practices do you have to heat yourself up when you're becoming dispirited? And are you using them? So in these disheartening times, it's so easy to get exhausted and to check out if we don't draw on these kinds of practices. To fail to do this is to dishonor those who came before us, and it would forsake those who will come after us. The third are physical conditioning practices. These are practices that keep the body strong and flexible, like exercise and yoga and Tai Chi or stretching, weightlifting, CrossFit. We need our bodies to be able to handle the journey when things become stressful and the stakes become high. Stress takes a toll on the body. We might need our body to be able to march or to protest. Even to sit in meditation or dance requires our body to have some condition and some strength and some flexibility. What are you doing, or what are you going to do to maintain your physical conditioning to get through these times? And the fourth set of practices we all need to be doing are called shadow work. Everyone has a shadow side. We all have blind spots and triggers and traumas and wounds that we carry. We have old coping strategies that may have once saved us from a difficult situation, but that are now not good for us anymore. An example from my own life. When I was young, and my parents would fight at night, which for one period of time was happening a lot before they got divorced. They would put me and my brother to bed. We shared a room, and then they would start yelling, and it seemed like it would never end. And so we'd get into one or the other bunk, and we would tickle each other's feet or rub each other's backs as a way to soothe ourselves from what was so loud and scary and confusing for, 6-year-old, 8-year-old kids. So we found ways to escape and to distance ourselves or distract ourselves so that we didn't just have to sit there, lying there in the dark in fear and confusion. And then, when I got older, I learned that alcohol did the same thing. And marijuana and a lot of other substances that soothed me when there was something I didn't want to feel. I was lucky to avoid getting too addicted to these kinds of things, but then I realized when I got married, because I have such a loving and patient wife, most of the time, that when things get difficult and I would check out or numb out, that this old coping mechanism that was no longer benefiting me, now it was hurting my relationships. So I had to learn new ways to stay present with what I was feeling, even when it was hard. That's shadow work. We all need to work on our shadows. Otherwise, they can ruin our marriage and our health and our reputation and our career. It involves working on things like impulse control and addiction and aggression and other secret and illicit and undermining behaviors. Shadow work includes finding intentional ways that we use to find and face our shadow side. We all have a shadow side. Most of us have some secret behaviors or old wounds and traumas, coping techniques maybe from childhood that don't serve us anymore. We need to be sure that we have ways to uncover our blind spots and become accountable. Shadow work often requires the assistance of someone else, like a spiritual director or a therapist or an accountability group, like a 12-step group or some men's groups and women's groups that do this. Because if we're not aware and in control of our shadow, then likely our shadow is in control of us. And under stress, these shadows grow larger and they can destroy our health and our families and our careers. How are you shining a light on your shadow? Let's do a quick review. What are the 4 kinds of spiritual practices? Just call them out. Cooling, heating, physical conditioning, and shadow work. Beautiful. We all would be wise to be filling our spiritual toolbox with all 4 kinds of practices and using them right now. In these times, we do these practices to keep our strength and to maintain our center so that we can be healthy and we can be effective. As my professor Cornell West likes to say, in times like these, we cannot be an echo. We need to be a voice. He says, don't take a stand, have a vision. I was talking to member Dion Lambert the other day. If you don't know Dion, she's a brilliant woman, a brilliant black woman, in fact. And she's a member of All Souls and a part of our DIVE team, our diversity, inclusion, vulnerability, and equity team. She's also the director of DEI education and training at the University of Tulsa. And she said, in times like these, we need to dream and use our imagination to envision the world that we want to live in. And we need to find and surround ourselves with other people who share a similar dream so that together we can manifest such a world. That's what we're doing here at All Souls. Surrounding ourselves with other people who share a similar dream so that we can manifest in our lives, in our community, and in our world, that kind of world we want to live in. It's important to remember that other generations have been through as much and even worse. And there are tried and true practices that they have shown us. So don't try to live your life without engaging these 4 types of practices in your daily life. When you're hot, cool down. When you're too cool, warm up. Stay as physically strong as you can and pay attention to your shadow. And you will be a source of hope and change for our community, and our country needs you at your best right now. And when you're not at your best, come here and we will lift you up. As we welcome 43 new members into the life of this community today, we are surrounding ourselves with people who share a similar dream of the world that we want to live in. Together, we will manifest that world for ourselves and for future generations. I love you. We can do this. Amen.
'Cause I know I sing, 'cause I know what it means to be free.
Yeah. Woo.